Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Breaking news, at least 8 people are reported to have been killed. 2,750 others have been injured across Lebanon, amongst them numerous members of Hezbollah. This after the pagers they used to communicate suddenly exploded. Amongst the injured, the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. These explosions happened simultaneously in Beirut, elsewhere in Lebanon, and in parts of Syria. Also ahead, Donald Trump blames Democrat rhetoric for whipping up hatred against him. This in an interview on X. And in Europe, floods from Storm Boris turned deadly and forced people to leave their homes in search of shelter. Welcome, thank you for joining us. That breaking news we bring you straight away in Lebanon, where we understand that at least 8 people have been killed. More than 2,750 others have been seriously injured. This after the pagers used by Hezbollah members to communicate exploded in multiple locations across Beirut and elsewhere in Lebanon. Well, hospitals have been inundated with wounded people requiring urgent care. Amongst those reported to have been injured, the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. Well, one Hezbollah official says the detonation of the pagers was, quote, the biggest security breach the group has ever been subjected to in nearly a year of conflict with Israel. Well, for all the latest on the ground, we can cross to Beirut and speak to our correspondent there, who's from the L'Orient today, Sally Abu Al-Joud. Thank you so much for joining us, Sally. What's the latest you're hearing at this stage?
So, like you mentioned, so far there's been thousands of people wounded after their pagers exploded. I was present at several hospitals in Beirut where patients were flooding the premises, many of whom had severe injuries in their faces and in their hands and in their genital area. Doctors have told me that it was possible that they received, they were paged, or they felt that their pager was overheating and they went to check it when it exploded.
Yeah, and I mean, Sally, surely this situation took everybody by incredible surprise, a great sense of shock. What is the mood like in Beirut this evening?
People are still trying to process what happened. Until now, hospitals are overwhelmed and people are still trying to understand what happened. It remains, no one has claimed the attack so far.
And what are we hearing from Hezbollah, for example?
Hezbollah has said that this has been the biggest security breach. They have said that many of their members were injured when this happened.
Yeah, okay, so and several injuries. And we've also heard as well, I believe Hezbollah saying that Israel will pay a heavy price for this. That's one of the sources I'm hearing quoted as having said. Sally, stay with us. We'll speak now to our guest who's here with us in the studio, Dr. Elie Al-Hindy. You are an associate professor at the College of Security and Global Studies at the American University of the Emirates. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, a pleasure.
It does appear this was a highly sophisticated attack, a remote attack. Have you ever seen anything comparable to this?
Not really. I haven't seen any of that. We know the technology is there. We know that Israel has attacked individuals in this manner before, and other players also around the world, but this mass and this size of the operation, more than 2,750 operations exploding in the same time, this I think is unseen before, and we're waiting to see what would be the consequences of such an attack. Really worrying.
And when you look at who was targeted, and more importantly, where they were targeted, we're talking about southern Lebanon, the east of the Bekaa Valley, the southern suburbs of Beirut. These are all areas, aren't they, where Hezbollah has a strong presence. So there's not really any doubt in anybody's mind as to who the intended target was.
No, of course not. I mean, this is the closed network of Hezbollah, and Hezbollah's operative. That's why there's also in Syria the same explosions. So it's a closed network used by Hezbollah's operative and close allies, like, for example, people in the Iranian embassy, and thus the hurting or the target of the Iranian ambassador being hurt also in one of the explosions.
What message do you think Israel's trying to send here?
I think it's very clear that for Israel in the past few months, it has become very clear that a wide range regional conflict is not permitted or welcomed at this stage. So Israel, I think, is benefiting from every single occasion to mark points, to get to targets, and eventually achieving the ultimate aim of weakening Hezbollah's ability to cause a threat to Israel. I don't think that Israel will allow a peaceful settlement that will return things to the status quo ante, in the sense that Hezbollah continuing to be at the border and continuing to cause a direct threat to Israel, even in the deep geography of Israel. So I think they're using anything they can, and for the first time using new tactics to weaken the abilities of Hezbollah, to make sure whenever things stop, if they stop, they would be in a situation where Hezbollah have much weaker ability to cause a threat to Israel.
Stay with us, Dr. Al-Hindy. I'd like to go back to Sally, who is there in Beirut, standing by for us. Clearly, there will be a lot of anticipation there, Sally, as to how Hezbollah responds to these attacks. Any indications as to what Hezbollah might do? What are we hearing?
So far, there hasn't been any threats made by the group. I think everyone, including the group in Lebanon, as well as families, as well as citizens, are still trying to process what happened. Nothing like that has ever happened before, including throughout the war since October 7. I think we just have to wait and see what Hezbollah's response. I would say maybe we would expect a speech soon or a more elaborate statement.
And obviously, given the context of what's happening on Israel's northern border and on Lebanon's southern border with Israel, I mean, was there a sense of inevitability that something on this scale could be being planned by a hostile force?
Not really. I would say no. We've been following the news on a daily basis in the south and the conflict. We did not see any signs of any attack as the one we saw today happening. We didn't see any threats. We didn't hear of any threats. We did not see any indication that we did not even imagine something like that would happen. When we started hearing the news, we were even wondering what these pagers were for. They were used by the Hezbollah members.
Yeah, I want to ask our guest here, Dr. Al-Hindy, in the studio, why are Hezbollah members carrying pagers? I mean, it's technology that, in many people's minds, will date back to the 1980s and 90s.
I'm not a security expert per se, but definitely we know that, as I mentioned earlier, this is a closed network for Hezbollah. They avoid using internet per se. They avoid using the cell phone, because all of this has been proven to be, could be breached. So I think they thought that pagers are a safer measure in that sense, and using such a closed network will keep them safe. Obviously not, as we see. Just a quick comment on what Sally was saying. I think we were able to see a culmination of events in the past couple of weeks since the big attack in Homs on the missile industry that was being built there, and then news of Iraqi militiamen and Houthi militiamen coming into southern Syria. And then last, or maybe yesterday actually, the visit of Hochstein to Israel and the obvious failure of that visit. So I think things were culminating, and we were expecting something big to happen. We were not sure what and how. Of course, nobody expected this kind of an attack. But I think, again, there's a big willingness in Israel to attack on a larger scale, whether in a big full-scale war or not. I don't It could be, if Israel could achieve what it wants without a full-scale war that could cause a lot of damage to its soldiers, then why not? If such an attack have been able to handicap a big part of the Hezbollah leadership, then Israel is unfortunately achieving its objective in that sense.
Stay with us. I'd just like to go back to Sally for one more quick question. I mean, Sally, if you could just bring us up to speed on the situation in Lebanon, the latest numbers you're hearing, how this is being covered on the media there in Lebanon. Also, just tell us what the situation is at the hospitals one more time.
Mm-hmm. The latest I've heard, the health ministry said that there's been around 2,750 people wounded, and the latest I've heard was 9 people were killed. The hospitals across Beirut that I've seen and across the country in the south and in the Bekaa are overwhelmed. But because of what's been happening in South Lebanon, hospitals were prepared for such a scenario or for a scenario where it involved a war. But they also required more equipment that the health ministry were supplying them with. Again, everyone's still trying to process what happened. Outside the hospitals, dozens of people, dozens of family members are distraught, are waiting impatiently for the patients in the hospitals.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, Beirut-based journalist for L'Orient Today, Sally Abu Al-Joud. Thank you very much. Indeed, really good to get the latest from you there. Dr. Hindy here with me in the studio. Early reports suggested that these paging devices were bought by Hezbollah fairly recently in the last couple of months. This looks like a highly carefully planned attack, a coordinated attack. It's no coincidence that they all exploded on the same day. Is that somehow a humiliation, do you think, for Hezbollah? It raises serious questions, doesn't it, about their security apparatus?
Definitely. It is a big embarrassment to Hezbollah. But same as all the previous attacks that have hit the heart of Beirut, that have hit the heart of Tehran, as we said, we're really witnessing a huge gap in the technology and the abilities of the Israeli critical attacks in that sense. And unfortunately, this is also says a lot about the readiness of Lebanon to receive, big numbers of wounded or injured or killed people. Lebanon is really not ready economically and technically and practically for a big war. So if such an attack with 2,000 people injured has caused such a chaos, can you imagine what will be a full-scale war impact on Lebanon altogether and the Lebanese people and the Lebanese civilians who unfortunately find themselves stuck in this war that they had nothing to do with or decide whether they are part of it or not.
Stay with us, Dr. Hindy, because I'd like to cross back to Beirut, and we can speak now to Makram Rabah, who is an assistant professor of history at the American University of Beirut. Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us at very short notice. Thank you, Professor. What's the latest you're hearing, just if you've got any further details to add on what happened? And could I just put that question I put to Dr. Hindy here first? How might Hezbollah respond to this?
Well, Hezbollah will simply use its old bag of tricks and say that they will wait for the right time and the right moment to retaliate. Over the last year or over even the last decade, Hezbollah and the entirety of the so-called Iranian axis of resistance has proven to be technologically very unadvanced. And what we have seen today is particularly proof of that. And what happened today in the streets of Beirut and even all the way to Damascus is an earnest reminder that we are living in a kind of a Hollywood espionage movie. Decades ago, we used to see these on TV and assume that this will not be a reality. Hezbollah is a consumer of technology, whereas Israel is a manufacturer of such security technologies. And it's actually not a security operation as much as a kind of a psychological warfare on not only people who claim to be fighters with Hezbollah, but the entirety of people who support Hezbollah, because many of the people who were targeted were not only security operatives, but also people who were part and parcel of the healthcare system or even the educational system. So all of a sudden, this so-called unsophisticated tool of communication was transformed by Israel to a kind of a lethal weapon to remind everyone and to mutilate. And this is what's important. Moving forward, when people who claim to be supporting Hezbollah look around the room, they will see people who are mutilated, people who have lost limbs. And this is a very important reminder that we are not playing war. This is real warfare, and people will die if this continues in a kind of a attempt by Iran and its access to actually play out the clock. The Israelis will not simply surrender unless they are given political, diplomatic, or even military assurances that it's the so-called Hezbollah threat on its northern border is contained to a certain extent.
So what you're saying, Professor, is basically this is a message from Israel to Hezbollah and those that support them that nowhere is safe and there is nowhere to hide. Is that the essence of it, at least part of that psychological message you were talking about there?
Yes, Tom, indeed. And to add to this, I think it's a message to the American administration, particularly to Biden and to Amy Hochstein, who was in Israel yesterday, that while the US administration has prevented Netanyahu from his full-scale land invasion, this has exempted what we call kind of surgical hits, because the attack today was not against Lebanese. Everyone who was attacked, minus a couple of innocent children who happened to be playing with their father's pages at the time, were people who are officially part of Hezbollah. And in the sequence of events, in the logic of the international community, Hezbollah has decided to open the front on October 8th. And what the people of Lebanon, who are hostages of Hezbollah and of Iran, are being reminded of, that they need to take a kind of political stand to prevent Iran and Hezbollah from further pushing us into this so-called quicksand.
And Professor, obviously it depends who you ask, but what is the sort of overall public perception in Lebanon towards Hezbollah? What do ordinary Lebanese people think of them? Has that opinion changed, in particular, with relation to what's been happening in Gaza?
I have said this, and I've said this over and over. Hezbollah are powerful not because of their weapons, but because of a sectarian system over time and their use of the clientelist system. In addition to bullying and their actual arms, they have been able to convince a big majority of the Shiites, not the entirety of them, that they are their only so-called safety net. And in this way, it is unscientific and perhaps illogical to ask someone who lives under a Hezbollah-controlled area what they think of it. So the margin of measuring Hezbollah's popularity does not rest in its ability to fight Israel, which it hasn't done for a long time, but the ability that as a so-called, as a presumed political actor in Lebanon, it is hugely responsible for destroying what remained of Lebanese state, be it their turning Lebanon into a narco state and thus isolating us from our economic environment, particularly the Arab Gulf, or their role in the money laundering and the destruction of the entirety of the banking system. So at the end of the day, I don't really care what Hezbollah supporters say. It is preventing people from holding it accountable at the polls through corruption or through bullying. And the reason why Lebanon has been drifting in limbo, Tom, is the fact that Hezbollah and its allies have been preventing the democratic election of a president.
Okay, well, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Makram Rabah, Assistant Professor of History at the American University of Beirut. Thank you very much indeed. I'm still here in the studio with Dr. Elie Al-Hindy, Associate Professor at the College of Security and Global Studies at the American University in the Emirates. Thank you for staying with us. Is there a danger, just picking up on what we were hearing there, that an attack like this could somehow galvanize public support for Hezbollah and perhaps an outpouring of sympathy, given that, you know, as we were saying, it's not just Hezbollah members. There were children and innocent people caught up in these attacks, and possibly some health workers as well.
That's true. Of course, our condolences to all the civilians who died in the act and who are completely innocent from all of that. But unfortunately, I have to agree with my friend, Dr. Makram, on the sense that the general environment, the general vibes in Lebanon are that Hezbollah has dragged Lebanon enough into wars and conflicts. And now the big embarrassment is that the biggest rhetoric of Hezbollah, being fighting Israel and defending the Shiites, both of them have collapsed in the sense that they have not been able to cause serious damage to Israel or to, go ahead as Hamas did in a sense of a direct attack. They have decided not to do that, or they are too weak to do that, and this collapses their theory that they can eliminate Israel in few hours or few days, as they have said before, them and the Iranian regime. And on the fact of protecting the Shiites in Lebanon and providing them with a suitable safety net. This has proven that their villages have been destroyed, their leadership have been killed without the ability of seeing any bright future in the long stand.
Dr. Al-Hindy, this is my last question. Does today's series of events take us a step closer to that regional, broader conflict that many had feared at the outset of the war in Gaza? Or do you think it shows that Hezbollah is not a force to be reckoned with? Lots of noise, lots of rhetoric, and they simply can't deliver the threat that they claim to be able to deliver.
This is actually the million-dollar question, Tom. Nobody can answer that. We are definitely playing on the edge. Some of the facts that we can read is that Iran is not willing to enter a direct confrontation with Israel because of what's happening with their negotiation with the USA and other factors. So Iran is out of this direct confrontation. Will there be a broader confrontation between Hezbollah, other militias present in Syria, and Israel? Yes, this is probable. It's becoming more probable every day, especially with the kind of attacks that Israel is doing and the kind of triggering that Israel is doing in order to benefit from the time and try to achieve its long-term goals in that sense. So yes, unfortunately, we are closer to a larger scale conflict, but definitely not the regional conflict that includes Iran and other states.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Elie Al-Hindy, Associate Professor at the Global College of Security and Global Studies at the American University of the Emirates. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Let's just get a recap of what we know at this stage. Lebanon is accusing Israel of orchestrating today's attack, which has killed at least 8 people and injured up to 3,000 others. Around 200 of the injured are in a critical condition. Well, it's not just in Lebanon. There are reports of exploding pagers in Syria as well. It appears that the lithium batteries used in those pagers used by Hezbollah overheated and exploded. As we were hearing from our correspondent in Beirut, lots of hospitals now at full capacity there. The Lebanese Red Cross saying more than 50 ambulances have been dispatched to try and treat the injured. We're keeping a close eye on that, and we'll bring you more as we get it. Moving now to some other world news. 2 days after a second apparent assassination attempt in as many months, Donald Trump is back on the campaign trail today. He's been spending today in Michigan, whilst his Democratic rival Kamala Harris has been in the key battleground state of Pennsylvania. Well, referring to the latest scare involving her rival, Harris said that she strongly condemns political violence, calling it unacceptable. Trump had previously pointed the finger of blame at Harris and President Joe Biden, citing their rhetoric about him. But Trump has then gone on to say that he has had, quote, a very nice call with President Joe Biden about boosting security service protection. Well, for more on this, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by our correspondent there, Caroline Malone. Caroline, lots of moments of heated rhetoric, and then last night what sounded like a rather reconciliatory set of words from Donald Trump. What is the mood today, do you think?
Well, certainly people are still very concerned about this attempted assassination attempt on Trump over the weekend. But certainly from Trump's campaign, we have heard a bit of back and forth, both with regard to suggesting that the rhetoric of the Biden presidency, but also the Harris-Walz campaign has in some way led to this, vulnerability to violence. But absolutely, as you point out, Trump said himself he was in a live stream event on Monday night promoting a new cryptocurrency, and he spoke about this phone call he had with President Biden and spoke about the event itself, praised the Secret Service and the agents that protected him, and said he had a very nice call with Biden. He couldn't have been nicer. And also that Trump had expressed to Biden the importance of increased protection, suggesting he needed more Secret Service agents. And that's something that we know that President Biden has already agreed with. On Monday, Biden spoke about the need for more resources. That's also something that's resonating through Congress. There's even a bipartisan task force that was already looking into the attempted assassination of Trump back in July in Butler, Pennsylvania. They will now take on board this more recent attempt and hopefully in a bipartisan way come to some conclusion. But yes, both sides back and forward accusing the other of using some way inflammatory language to make the situation worse. But overall, there does seem to be consensus that protecting these candidates is ultimately the most important thing here.
And just briefly, if you will, tell us what the two candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, have been doing today.
Well, despite, this potential violence from the weekend, Trump is determined to carry on. He seems to be, from his, what his campaign aides have said. He is rallying in Michigan. He's there alongside his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance. They know, of course, it's a crucial state, a swing state, in which getting voters there could make all the difference when it comes to the election. And then we've got Kamala Harris doing much the same. She's in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, another key swing state. She'll actually be speaking in about an hour to an association of black journalists. That's a similar event, actually, that Trump spoke to in Chicago a few weeks ago. He had some missteps there, potentially offending people, especially by questioning whether Kamala Harris is in fact black. But I'm sure it will be an important demographic for either of them or both of them, because that's quite an important way in which people decide how they're going to vote, listening to these people in person. But it does come down to the swing states now, and it's clear from the campaign agenda, whether it's Michigan or Pennsylvania. Later in the week, Trump will be in New York and Washington, D.C., and then on to North Carolina. It's clear that these campaigns now are very much focused on the swing states. OK, Caroline Malone in Washington, D.C., thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest on what's been happening there. Well, let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to David Cay Johnston, who is a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology and also a Pulitzer Prize-winning former New York Times journalist. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor. You're also the author of The Making of Donald Trump, amongst other books. We're about 7 weeks away, aren't we? We're exactly 7 weeks away, actually, from Election Day. Just how atypical would you say the current political climate is there now?
Oh, there's nothing like this in American political history. There has been violence in American political history, starting with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln 159 years ago. But this campaign and the way folks have lined up on both sides is very unusual. It represents long building issues in America in which those at the top several percent of the population have done incredibly well. And the vast majority of Americans are no better off than they were 50 years ago.
I mean, lots of inflammatory language being used. Is it coming more from one side than the other, would you say?
Oh, it's absolutely coming more from one side than the other. J.D. Vance, the vice presidential running mate of Donald Trump, has acknowledged, for example, that the stories he helped spread about legal Haitian immigrants kidnapping pet dogs and cats to eat them are false, but he's defended that kind of falsity. And Donald Trump, way back in his 2016 campaign, on more than one occasion urged his fans to beat up black people in the audience or critics in the audience, at one point promising he'd pay their legal bills, which he would never do. That's something you have not seen at all from the Democrats.
Well, to defend J.D. Vance, the vice presidential running mate of Donald Trump, he says the left needs to tone down the rhetoric. He says the hate speech, and I had a guest on our program yesterday saying the hate speech all seems to be coming from the left, and he cited Hollywood and actors and musicians as being the ones really peddling that, as well as the media.
Well, I'm not responsible for what you say, and candidates aren't responsible for what actors and other celebrities say. But the candidates themselves in the 16, 20, and 24 elections on the Democratic side have not said anything calling for violence, whereas Donald has made numerous statements that I've documented at the time and in my 3 books, my trilogy on Donald, where, in fact, he's stoked violence, he's encouraged it, and shows no shame about it. I mean, that's not unusual for Donald, who I've covered since 1988, when way back then I wrote about the prospect of his becoming the American president.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because of our breaking news. We're way over time, so I really appreciate you taking in the time to wait and speak to us. David Cay Johnston, professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology, thank you very much indeed. Let's get a quick check of some other stories we're following for you now. And severe flooding across Central Europe is now known to have resulted in the deaths of at least 21 people. This follows on from a system of torrential rainfall, which has left behind a trail of destruction in the Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Austria. In Hungary, the authorities have set up mobile dams to protect against flooding from the River Danube. During the course of the past day, the city of Nysa in southwestern Poland has become a particular focus of attention for emergency teams. This after the river there broke its banks. 226 people are known to have been killed. More than 70 others are reported missing in Myanmar. That's the result of last week's Typhoon Yagi, which triggered flooding and landslides right across Southeast Asia. The death toll from that severe weather system now stands at more than 500. A typhoon has brought havoc to Shanghai, forcing more than 400,000 residents to evacuate. Typhoon Bebinka, believed to be the strongest storm to hit the region since 1949, downed trees and brought with it travel chaos, forcing all flights at Shanghai's two main airports to be grounded. Let's get a quick reminder of our top stories here on Al Arabiya. At least 8 people reported to have been killed. 2,750 others have been injured across Lebanon, amongst them numerous members of Hezbollah. This after pages they used to communicate suddenly exploded. Well, amongst the injured were the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon, and the explosions happened simultaneously in Beirut as well as elsewhere in Lebanon and in parts of Syria. And just bringing you the latest there that we've got for you from Lebanon. At least 8 people known to have been killed. Upwards of 2,700 others have been injured after pagers used by Hezbollah exploded, it appears, almost simultaneously, not just in Lebanon, also reports of these explosions happening across the border in Syria as well. A tense situation there this evening, as we've been hearing from our correspondent and as we've been hearing from analysts here in the studio. It remains to be seen how Hezbollah will respond to these attacks, which it blames Israel for having orchestrated. So that's the latest we have for you on that situation involving those exploding pagers. We understand they were equipped with lithium batteries, which overheated and then spontaneously combusted. Several people injured there in Lebanon and in Syria as well. Hospitals overwhelmed by the numbers of casualties. So that's what we've got for you at this stage. The latest from Lebanon on those pagers used by the Shia militant group Hezbollah, which exploded, resulting in multiple injuries. Well, we have a website, alarabiya.net, where you can find all the news in English as well as in Arabic. So do check that out as well. That's it from me. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned if you can.